The moment I require someone else to accurately explain my value before I can fully occupy it and communicate it clearly myself, I have handed them authority over my true identity. Welcome back to the Catalyst Code, where we crack the internal code that creates your external results. I'm Diane Armitage. This podcast isn't just about awareness or how do I improve myself. Most people stop there and then wonder why their results aren't changing faster. This is about your embodiment, learning to operate from your true identity and maintaining the frequency that actually produces the life and results you want. Once embodiment shifts, everything changes. You are the catalyst. This is the code. So let's go. A few weeks ago, I introduced a foundational Catalyst Code episode called The 3 Pillars of Change. Now, if you truly want change in your life, in your wealth, in your business, your relationships, your sense of purpose, your momentum, this is the foundation underneath all foundations, because it explains why real change so rarely becomes permanent. As I said in that episode, most people are trying to change what's happening without ever changing who it's happening from. If you'll recall, the 3 pillars I based this on came from Neville Goddard. They are number 1 pillar, self-observation, number 2, definition of aim, and number 3, detachment. Now, bear with me, just a quick review here, because as I said, this is foundational to understand, right? Okay, so first is self-observation, about seeing the contrast. You're recognizing how you've been reacting and responding from the current identity you've been operating from. And in that contrast, you're defining the state you wish to make visible. This is the second step, what Neville calls definition of aim. And I've changed it to definition of I am. Because the fact is this, you're not aiming somewhere. A lot of people think, oh, well, that means it's a goal. No, the definition of your true I am is finally understanding who you really are. Remember, I said define the state you wish to make visible. Make visible is the key. Not all those other words you hear people throwing around when they're talking about how to change your life. You are not creating your new you. You are not becoming. You are not even transforming. So many teachers use the becoming phrase. You're becoming this new thing. That is nonsense. You already are. You can't become what you already are. You are not becoming. You are identifying who you already are. So when I said make visible, I don't mean the state you wish to work hard to create. There's no creating here. The state you wish to make visible is already here. That is your great I am. And that is what you are finally seeing yourself as. And then the third key is detachment. Now, a lot of people get this wrong about Neville's meaning of detachment too. They think it has something to do with getting clarity on the goal and then letting it go into the universe, releasing it into the universe, detaching from the trying hard or forcing it, and letting it all work for you. Now, there is something to be said about understanding how the law of vibration, actual physics of attraction and magnetism, work with the creator and the catalyst physics side of you when you release and let go. But that's for an entirely different podcast episode. What we're talking about here is your identity, your base identity, not the goal, not the dream, but the truth of you that you are finally seeing in and of yourself. So detachment here simply means that you are stepping out of the identity that you've probably lived in most of your life because it's what's been formed around you and molded to you by other people and external circumstances all your life. It's what I call the matrix identity, what has been pulled over your eyes as what's supposed to be real about you when it has nothing to do with the true of you at all. So, those are the three pillars. But I want to return in this episode to the second pillar, definition of I am, because this is where people typically get tripped up. This is where I see my clients walking happily along in their true identity and then falling into an open manhole. Now, as I noted here, it's about recognizing the identity already within you that knows exactly who you are and what kind of life, opportunities, people, expansion, and contribution are actually meant to meet you, actually waiting for you once you stop operating as someone smaller. Most people never fully step into their true identity because they're still unconsciously allowing this gravitational pull to what I call a fallback identity. The fallback identity. It's the identity you carry with you that's built around permission, permission to be seen, permission to succeed, permission to ask, permission to create from your own thoughts, your own words, permission to stop proving, permission to charge what you're worth, permission to stand without question or apology in the much bigger version of yourself than what the outside world has seen you practicing and being all these years. And so what happens? Even when people understand and recognize, or recognize, as Michael Beckwith says, even as they understand and recognize with their true identity, there's this tendency to keep emotionally returning to the smaller version of themselves because it feels safer, more familiar, more acceptable to the world around them. And as far as their reasoning mind is concerned, it's all they've been acting in until now. So why rock the boat? This is why so many talented people stay invisible. This is why people dabble instead of fully inhabiting what they are intrinsically and powerfully built for. This is why people overgive, undercharge, overthink, procrastinate. They hide, they delay, and they continuously wait for someone else to finally recognize their value before they fully recognize it and acknowledge it themselves. They are waiting for permission to become who they already are. And that is the real identity trap. Many people are not only waiting for permission, they are allowing other people to define who they are. Or they think other people are defining them in a certain way. And once that happens, they begin unconsciously building an entire fallback identity around someone else's level of perception of them. Did you get all that? I remember Bob Proctor used to always quote Charles Horton Cooley's famous observation. Let me see if I get this right. I am not who I think I am. I am not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. And that is the permission trap. I saw this recently in three very different situations just this last week alone. The first was a client of mine who was working with me to build her first webinar around building creative passion and purpose. She has such a powerhouse understanding in this niche for musicians and artists. But when she turned her first webinar draft to me for review, it was clear that she was unconsciously leaning on my identity, my language, my structure, instead of fully occupying her own, which is her own brilliant genius. Now, why did this happen? Because fallback identities borrow certainty from somewhere else. They imitate instead of inhabit. Did you hear that? They imitate instead of inhabit. It's important. It's important that you understand this. Now, oddly, AI just came to mind here, so I'm just going to jump in on this. I love working with my ChatGPT because not only has it developed a fabulous sense of humor that often feels like Bob Proctor's wry humor, but it's quite adept at organizing, schedulizing, and recommending strategy at a 25,000-foot level on all the various worlds I work in. It, however, is never, ever, ever allowed to write for me, not even a LinkedIn post, because I believe that we were all put on the planet with a voice that is unique to the world. It is our own. And that voice is the gift that we've been given to give to the world. I knew my voice would be expressed through the writing channel when I was 8 years old. I stepped fully and completely into that identity way, way before I even baked my first brownie via a very hot light bulb in my Susie homemaker oven. I was so solid in that identity, in fact, that in my first year of my master's program, when my philosophy professor informed me that I was the worst writer he had ever had in all of his years of teaching, I laughed out loud. And then I went to the administration office and I canceled my class. This was not arrogance. This was me standing and knowing solidly in the identity that I knew was true, the identity that landed me on this planet with a very clear purpose. Why, for even one other week, would I put up with someone who had such a low opinion of my voice? That was his perception of me. It was not mine. So many millions of people are using AI to suddenly be these prolific authors and writers when they have never fashioned their voice in this endeavor ever in their lives before, ever in this writing channel in their lives. And there's not a damn thing wrong with that because they've been given their own unique voice in this world to express through an entirely different channel than writing. That is what is so genius about humankind, each with our own voice creating ripples and waves in this world. Now, you've heard me mention Nelson Coates. He's a very dear friend of mine. He's one of Hollywood's most revered production designers in the world. He creates entirely imaginary worlds for movies and award-winning streaming series that no one else can see until he makes a physical reality of what is in his mind. He is an incredible, unbelievable talent. And I would never, ever in my life even think of trying to drum up the kind of creations that he spins from his mind into the real world. But more and more of AI is being moved in that industry to imitate and try to replace the genius of Nelson and other very top of the world production designers, because I guess the imitation is worth the budget cost. After all, it was built on the harvest of the work in the first place, their work. It's why I honor and respect directors like John Chu, who believe that the unique, limitless imagination of the human production designer that he works with will make his movies uncannily memorable for the ages. That is somebody I admire. Now, back to my webinar writing client. I got a little off course there. I'm not saying my client used AI to fashion her webinar. She's actually a very astute and beautiful writer in her own right. But her fallback identity convinced her that she was so uncertain about communicating the truths that she already inherently has known and has lived in her own life that she unconsciously borrowed certainty from someone else, in this case, me. Fallback identity imitates instead of inhabits. Fallback identity imitates instead of inhabits. Now, when I simply alerted her to this fact, she was actually surprised. She has been unconscious to it. And she went back to the drawing board and she wrote something really beautiful in her own voice. She stepped back into her true identity. And as a result, her presentation was brilliant and flawless and all uniquely her own. Now, the second example happened this week with a very talented friend of mine who has created something extraordinary, something that will save kids' lives in emergencies. And then he watched someone else from a podium this week loudly and largely praise someone other than him for its creation. Now, emotionally, it nearly destroyed him. Not because his work disappeared, not because the impact disappeared, but because his nervous system had unknowingly attached his identity to this external recognition. All this creation of mine and all my passion thrown into this creation, and they don't even know it's me behind it. How many times have we each said this to ourselves? Yes, that can definitely be debilitating for anyone. And when the recognition was withheld, his identity destabilized with it. Now, thankfully, he's smarter than that. And thankfully, multiple people in the room were stunned at the announcement because they knew the truth. Reality in the room did not match what was said from the podium, and they made the effort to reach out to him with assurances. So now the next step for him is not obsessing over the podium moment, much less that trigger to that deeper stream of incorrect thought. No one recognizes what I do. And the next step, even though wonderful to receive these assurances, doesn't necessarily mean that this is what he stands upon as his foundational pillar. The next step is stabilizing back in his true identity, the identity that created this newness for the entire world, the true identity beyond the need for the podium in the first place. Because when your identity becomes dependent upon public recognition, your nervous system rises and falls with the opinions and the omissions and the blindness and the limitations of other people. But when your identity stabilizes internally first, recognition becomes a reflection of your work, never the source of your worth. You know what you are delivering to the world, and you know that that is all that matters, and that in the end, it all comes around. People may overlook you temporarily, but the moment you begin overlooking yourself through their eyes, the fallback identity has regained the driver's seat. Now, I've got to say something similar happened to me just yesterday. Now, I've recently been fielding conversations and opportunities around very high level strategy work involving development, experience systems, emotional engagement, curriculum strategy around that engagement architecture, audience loyalty ecosystems. This is where I love to work. This is what I've been involved in for 30, 35 years. So I had reached out to my brother about contacting a renowned developer that we both admire, but he's more familiar with my brother. They talk with each other, they golf with each other, and I'd like a connection to have a conversation with him. My brother, being the amazing brother that he's always been, reached out immediately, and the developer asked him, "Well, what does she do?" And he answered, as many people know me to do, "She's a writer. She writes articles and campaigns and PR." Now, did that sting a little? For a minute. Yes, it stung. Because when someone cannot fully perceive your range, your vision, or your actual value, they will often reduce you into the category their own mind can understand and see as the easiest explanation of you. But here's what hit me almost immediately. This was largely my gaffe because I've never had an in-depth conversation with my brother about the work I really do. But more importantly, even if we had had that conversation, it's not my brother's responsibility to define who I am. The moment I require someone else to accurately explain my value before I can fully occupy it and communicate it clearly myself, I have handed them authority over my true identity. And that is the trap. People wait. They wait for parents and spouses and audiences and bosses and industries and followers and teachers and friends and institutions to finally say, yes, now you are allowed to become that. But your true identity has never, ever been milling around outside that door waiting for external approval. It is waiting for your recognition. You have built within you the identity that recognizes not only who you are, how magnificently unique to this world you are, but it recognizes again the opportunities, the people, the expansion meant to meet you. Once you stop operating as someone smaller, true identity does not require anything outside of you to remain true. It is simply and steadfastly true before the metrics, before the recognition, before the audience catches up, before the world reflects it back to you. And that is the moment where real embodiment begins.